Hi everyone, Rival here and welcome back to the channel. Now away from my poor quality Pokemon video content, absolutely terrible jokes, and continuous suffering as a fan of sports teams who currently aren't winning the biggest trophies right now, I happen to work as a buyer in my everyday life. Now, I will try and spare you the exhaustingly boring details of a quick minute overview, but in my job I have to pay attention to fluctuating prices of the field I work in, rising costs, opportunity buy-in. I can already see you're thinking of clicking off just from that, but bear with me please, bear with me. I do promise it gets good. The video part, that is. To save you the boring details, I essentially have to be like Professor Xavier and Cole Phelps combined to get the best outcomes. But there's actually a major issue with my job. It sometimes crosses over into my everyday life and makes me astutely aware of how Pokemon, one of my biggest hobbies, alongside being a terrible NBA 2K, FIFA and Madden player, can actually get incredibly expensive. Now, you're probably thinking, well, obviously Rival, right? Pokemon's been around for 28 years, it's been released on multiple different consoles, some of them haven't been in circulation for a very long time, so naturally the price has increased along with demand and it will continue to rise up. And to that I say, yeah, you're right, bye guys. However, if you stick around with me for the next 15 to 20 minutes, we'll have a bit of a deep dive on the games, the cards, the merchandise and everything else, so you can see a bit of a breakdown of how expensive Pokemon can really be as a fan, and how Pokemon has now reached a point where its revenue actually outranks multiple different countries if Pokemon had a GDP. And I promise no buying terminology unless it's required. And I'm going to start off with the element that inspired this actual video. The return to an obsession that I had as a kid has resurfaced as an adult with a growing family. The resurgence of the trading card game collection scene over the last number of years has been a sight to behold for me. Everyone's intention's a bit different when you get involved in the TCG. You could be a competitive player. Unlike me, you could be a good one. You could be a massive collector. You could see the financial benefit of getting involved with all those Charizard cards. Or you could just enjoy the thrill of opening up packs. Regardless of intention, to be at the stage we are with the trading card game feels full circle for me at times. Especially as a kid who just wanted Pokemon cards for Christmas. For reference, by the way, so people can rightfully call me out for my stupidity as a kid, I am 100% certain I had the Team Rocket set cards and quite a few of them at that, but I allowed my parents to get rid of them because I don't need them anymore, which was absolutely genius of myself. And whilst I'm personally not here for the money gain of it, the fact that I managed to do that is something I'll forever be kicking myself for, because it could be a lot of money. The issue with the trading card game as a standalone hobby is that it can get very expensive if you're not careful, especially if you don't plan out how to tackle your main objective. Unfortunately, I do not have many clips of me opening packs recently. I recently opened an ETB for the first time in months, but I currently don't have a setup for recording as I'm in the process of moving. So instead, enjoy some old pack openings I did from about a year ago and TCG Live. Now, I enjoy opening packs and having fun with the TCG, and the nostalgia brings me back a lot, and I love the experience of it. It's something I do with my fiance nowadays, and it's a lot of fun, but it's an expensive spend if you're not careful. To show you a bit of a breakdown, I will cover two sets that I'm currently collecting at the moment, and the cost implications of them. So I'm collecting 151 because I'm nostalgic and clearly can't let go of the past in Pokemon, and also Paradox Rift because I found it quite cool. Now every set is completely different in terms of price depending on the site that you're using and whether or not they're graded or ungraded. We can realistically look at loads of different sites and then use whatever we wanted as a reference, so that I could back up my argument depending on what it is. So for easier numbers, I'm going to use one site and what they list for ungraded card costs. If I were to buy every card outright for 151, it would cost me a grand total of $750, which at the current exchange rate is around about £600 in the UK. If I were to buy every card from Paradox Rift, that would cost me around $783. Now, that's a lot of money just for individual cards. When you look at the 8 sets that have currently been released for Scarlet and Violet, we would have to pay around $5,500, which would be just over £4,300 in order to get every card in all of the sets. Right, I'm gonna stop shoehorning the pound cost to English in me, just felt like I had to. I don't know. As I've already said, every price can fluctuate and differ. You could get some of these cards at a decent amount cheaper, or it could be more expensive. The card's quality, where you buy them from, and sometimes even ignorance to what they're worth can be deciding factors in how much you pay for a specific card. Now, what are the alternatives to just buying individual cards? Well, you can buy loose packs or special collections such as Elite Trainer boxes, all of which give you an opportunity to collect all the cards in one set. So let's take a standard ETB box price. This is usually $49.99 or $54.99 in the UK. Sorry, I don't know the cost in the US. I will put it on screen here, with them coming in with 9 packs in total for standard boxes from external retailers, and 11 from the Pokemon Center store. This is essentially like a gamble and a pot shot in the dark to try and obtain the cards that you need. The word gamble will be in brackets because one day I'm definitely going to cover Pokemon and the history of gambling, and the technicalities of how we work around it. It's always a very contentious topic, especially when you're debating the idea of things like loot boxes. That being said, you are getting a physical thing instead of something that's virtual. I don't know, I've always been a bit careful with it. I know I've been quite passionate about it, mostly going back to my FIFA days when I used to open packs, because I definitely spent a lot of money on them. Different topic, I'll definitely do a video sometime. Anyways, every card has a different type of rarity, with your common cards being, well, common, and you can easily pick up 3 or 4 of the same card from one ETB. But then you start to get the really rare cards, and these usually don't appear too often when you open packs, and in actuality all have different rarities as well. To give you an example, Paradox Rift has a total of 266 cards in its classification, minus the ones that you get given with specific sets, which is also a thing as well. Now, 182 of those are within the number range on the card, but the rest of them beyond that number only increase the rarity, gaining themselves their own classification, including special illustrator cards and even cards that are gold. To try and avoid all the confusion, I'm going to put all of them on screen right now, and how rare they are, in reference to some of the Pokemon in games. Now, these additional 84 cards in the set are quite hard to get, so if you want every single one, it's going to take some work and a massive amount of luck. As I mentioned before, I recently bought an ETB, the one that's currently on screen for Paradox Rift. And from this set I got 2 illustrator cards and 2 standard EX cards, which in the past has been a bit better and sometimes been even worse in terms of pull rate. For argument's sake, let's say we class this as the standard in order to work out a price of how much it would cost me via ETBs. If we needed 84 special cards and we pulled 2 in ETB, we would need 42 ETBs in order to successfully obtain every card. Now, as I mentioned, a standard ETB is $49.99 to $54.99, but I managed to purchase this particular one for $35.05. So, going off that price, it would cost me £1,470 via ETBs in order to obtain all these cards, which works around $1,875. And bearing in mind, this is banking on me getting every single ETB with a new special card and not getting any duplicates, which is highly unlikely in doing so. Now, this cost can be significantly decreased with luck. So, for example, the most expensive card currently as I'm doing this video for the Paradox Rift set is the on-screen Roaring Moon card, which I managed to obtain and got quite early on. Now, this drops the price of purchasing every individual card by a decent amount. For 151, on the other hand, I have a lot of special cards, but I do not have the most expensive one, which is currently, you guessed it, a Charizard card, because it's always a Charizard card. And this is why people can get very excited over packing a rare card, because the cost of the set significantly decreases if you get lucky. Let's say, for example, you start collecting 151 now, which is around $750 for every card, in your first ETB, which is $64, according to my converter of price, that is. Also, bearing in mind, 151 is actually a bit more expensive and doesn't usually go on offer. Anyways, in this ETB, you get extremely lucky and get what we call the God Pack, with Charmander, Charmeleon and Charizard illustrator cards. That's a total of around $160 for those cards, which instantly decreases the amount the set could cost in order to buy the rest of them. That's only if you manage to get lucky though. More often than not, that sort of luck doesn't exist, hence the whole gambling debate, because you're essentially betting on the chance that you're going to get one of these sort of packs. Especially if you see people on social media getting packs like this, it makes you want to try try it even more, because unfortunately that's how the human brain is designed. Now you're probably wondering, why would you risk that? If you aren't going to get lucky, then it's just a massive waste of money. And first off, hey, that's harsh to judge my stupid decisions with money. It's also quite fair. But as I mentioned, it's a combination of things. Pokemon in the West certainly has a massive connection to the concept of gotta catch 'em all. Now it's not actually been a thing for years, but considering the anime's opening literally says it, it's stuck with a lot of people. As you get older as well, the nostalgia definitely plays a part in how you think and operate with Pokemon. For some it reminds you of being younger, and for some it's just a continuation of your interest over the years. Add in the thrill of opening packs and getting lucky when you get that Charizard card, and you have a recipe for the Pokemon TCG addiction. Of course, you can also get into it for money reasons. Understandably, some people will frown upon that, especially if you're into it for purer reasons, but for some, money is money, especially with the explosion of it and the interest in all the Pokemon packs and cards, because most of us probably had some of these cards back in the day and now they're worth a significant amount of money, and you just wish that you'd held on to them as time went on, but like me, unfortunately you didn't. There's just so many ways to consume the TCG in the way we do, even if you're aware of the potential costs or not. Some could be pure and others not so much, but it doesn't change the fact it can get very expensive very quickly if you're not careful. This is what caused me to stick to just collecting 2 sets at a time, and I've managed to get quite a lot of them, which is good, but I still have a long way to go for these particular sets. Otherwise, it can really balloon from an expensive hobby to a wallet-draining activity. Now, on the competitive side of things, it's a bit different. It's actually well documented that you can get a competitive deck relatively cheaply compared to other card games. The cost in Pokemon cards usually comes down to the cards being somewhat special. For example, that Charizard card that's $108 in 151, its normal version is only $3.19. Or another example is the Giratina V card. The normal is $3.19 and the Illustrator one is $426. Just point out, by the way, that's one of the coolest cards I've ever seen. If somebody could send me one over, I'd be incredibly grateful. Alternatively, you could just hit those like and subscribe buttons. To me, something even more valuable than the Giratina card. Anyways, this is vastly different from a game like Yu-Gi-Oh! For example. Often cards can quickly explode in price when their competitive use skyrockets because of a specific tactic or deck that makes it broken. This is also why Yu-Gi-Oh! Regularly has an updated ban list that also heavily influences the price market, but Pokemon's ban list traditionally stays the same. I'd say this is one thing expense-wise that isn't as bad for Pokemon. A lot of the expensive cost as a hobby stays on the collection side of the series, and that's why you end up spending a fortune to get your master set that burns a hole in your wallet. Also, trading cards does still exist. You can go to places and trade cards with people to get ones you've not got. Now, whether or not you get the value that you want, that's another story entirely. Not just that, are you going to continue buying even though we know the expense? Probably. I do actually think that the trend will die down a bit in terms of the money side of it, similar to other hobbies. To give you an example, I'm a big collector of shoes and previously worked for a company that sells them. Back when I did, the biggest commodity was the Jordan 1. Whenever they hit the shelves in the UK, they were bought instantly and were potentially sold for a higher cost. The issue with that was that eventually the prices of the shoes shot up, and it reached a stage where they weren't as financially viable anymore for those interested. And now you can walk into a store in the UK and actually see them on the shelf. Something that I'm adjusting to because I had no chance for years, especially when I wanted to get some dunks. I really love the Gundam ones, by the way, and I do have one pair. I personally do think the collector side of Pokemon will take a dip like this. Not necessarily the older versions, because they're either out of print or out of stock, but with the newer versions that could easily happen. Still very expensive though. Now, I have previously covered how expensive Pokemon games can be in general in the past. For reference, this video here. 215 Great British Pounds for a video game released in 2005. Make sure to check out that video for more details, so instead I'm going to break it down a bit more simple when looking at the prices of Pokemon games. To break it down and highlight the most expensive Pokemon games, let's just look at the main series. Like with the training cards, I'm going to use one website only for the pricing to keep it as simple as possible, but once again it's important to note there's a fluctuation in pricing for every game on the list. You might have to pay over the odds for one, or find a legitimate one for £5 at a car boot sale. Every source is different. Now, if you were to buy every single Pokemon main series game from CEX, you would pay a total of £1,235, at an average price of £47.50. If we were to exclude anything beyond Generation 5, that would be an average cost of £58.43 for every game. Now, I didn't include them in that figure, so if you were to buy every remake game, it would cost you £554 at an average cost of £55.40. Now, naturally, the cost of everything, especially old games, will increase naturally. They're simply not being made anymore, so there's a finite amount that exist. Unfortunately, nothing's the same price as when we were kids, otherwise I could buy a Freddo for 10p. Do they have Freddos in America, by the way, or is that just me being British? But even so, the price increases are absolutely crazy. I also think it's important to note there's a massive correlation between the most popular games and being the most expensive. And it's also worth noting, if you were to buy these games boxed, the price jumps up by sometimes 2 to 3 times the amount you would pay unboxed. Again, not unexpected, I guess. Naturally, collectibles in packages are worth more than those that aren't. I think the major issue I see is the difficulty in accessing these games. Obviously, there's another method that we can't mention that's totally wrong and totally bad. You know, don't do it or you're the evil person. I have never done it before. They are watching. In all seriousness though, emulation is the route people go down because there's no accessibility to the old games on newer consoles. If you think back to Generation 1 and Generation 2 all being available on the 3DS at a reasonable price, this opened up legitimate ways to play the old games on a newer console. The issue with that is that they don't exist anymore, so once again we're back to square one. Hence there's not really any other choice but to use that method. Otherwise, how else are you going to experience the series? And of course this isn't strictly limited to the prices of the main series games either. It's pretty well documented that XD Gale of Darkness will cost you a price of a console if you were to purchase it now. It's a very good game. In fact, I have very fond memories with it over the years. It was actually one of the first Pokemon home console games with its own innovative story, and was a pathway to one of the coolest Pokemon ever in the Shadow Lugia. But come on, that much money? That's outrageous. There's a lot of factors that have led to Pokemon games getting this expensive. The first one is definitely supply, because the supply of old games that are in good condition is much lower nowadays because they're so old. And saying that makes me feel old. When they're in boxes, especially the handheld versions, there's even less of a supply. Hence an old Pokemon game can be expensive just on its own and then double or triple the price when it's got an original box. Not just that, but old games didn't get printed as much sometimes, and don't have online versions available to play either. Pokemon Channel, for example, is expensive, but it didn't sell too much compared to others, so the amount of copies is lower and therefore the price is higher. This is actually quite a common thing that happened with JRPGs that were made in the 90s. There wasn't as many copies available or made, so now 20 to 30 years later, the pool of games available now are quite shallow. The newer games, especially on the Switch, don't really have this issue. Not only are they on up-to-date consoles, but they also have online versions available alongside the physical copies, so the accessibility is much better for playability. If you combine the popularity of the games alongside not having as many copies available now because they're not in print and haven't been for years, with people trying to get a profit or multiple copies already being taken off the market, you get a Heart Gold copy that's triple figures, and even more if you get the peripheral that was originally released with it. Is there a solution to this? Well, from Pokemon's perspective, yes. You just add them to the Switch Online consoles that already exist. We already have Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance, so they can be covered quite easily. We already have some Pokemon games on there, like the Pokemon Stadiums, the TCG card game, and Pokemon Snap, so let's add them on too. But unfortunately, I think the popularity of Pokemon would actually drive an additional cost. It'd probably be something like the Pokemon Access Collection, and it would end up being additional money on top of the virtual consoles that already exist for you to use, because as a commodity, Pokemon is worth a significant amount of money, and people would pay it because it's, well, Pokemon. But there's also no other way around it. The games are expensive, and the solution to stopping games from being expensive and more accessible would likely incur an additional cost no matter the way you work it, and that is not a route that everyone would be satisfied with, because again, an additional cost. Hence, when people really want to play old Pokemon games, they use the route that they do, because otherwise, if you really wanted to relive the past and play the Battle Frontier for Pokemon Emerald, you would have to pay £100 just to get a hold of the game cartridge. The issue with that is there's no connectivity to Pokemon Home, so you really can't try and catch them all. Instead, they're just relegated to your computer. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to highlight an exercise I did very recently to explain Pokemon merchandising. I made a little trip to my local Primark, just to venture of course and have a look in the store. Actually, it's because I knew they had Bleach shirts in there. Didn't buy one, was just curious. And it's important to bear in mind my local Primark is not a gigantic one. It's a decent sized store, but not what you would call a flagship one. Within the store I found the following items: Pokemon t-shirts for men, Pokemon t-shirts for women, Pokemon t-shirts for kids, Pokemon socks for men, women and kids, merchandise. Pokemon throws, both a throw that's a blanket and a hooded throw, a Pokemon woven basket that had Pikachu's face on it, Pokemon lunchboxes, and Pokemon water bottles. Both the last two had multiple different designs. I then went to the stationery store Ryman, and they had the following: Pokemon books for kids to help with learning, Pokemon storybooks, Pokemon stationery, Pokemon puzzles, and they also sell Pokemon TCG cards. In a local supermarket, there was again Pokemon t-shirts, you could buy the video games, Pokemon toys, the TCG cards, and again water bottles. So that's just 3 shops, but all in a close distance of each other. Pokemon merchandise is everywhere, literally everywhere. And it's not just for the kids, which is the target audience because of its age rating. There's Pokemon items for anybody and everybody. This is exactly why Pokemon is the best earning franchise ever in terms of merchandise. It essentially dwarfs anything else. It's not necessarily trying to beat anybody, it just does. As it's become so successful and it's absolutely everywhere, however, it can very easily become expensive when you start tallying up how much things cost. I'll give you an example. I happen to own multiple of the Pokemon Build-A-Bears. I actually started as a method to get my fiancée into Pokemon. We went to watch Detective Pikachu in the cinema when it came out, and she found Psyduck and Pikachu really cute. And of course, because marketing, Build-A-Bear had them both available, so naturally I got them both. Then the Evolution line started. I got an Eevee, Flareon, Jolteon, and Vaporeon. I also got a Pichu because it was the pre-evolution of Pikachu. I got a Dragonite, but that one was for myself. I also got a Squirtle during that period in 2020 when you couldn't go out and get a cup of coffee with anybody, and had to stand far apart when you were trying to get into a supermarket. Don't think I'm missing any one of the Build-A-Bears, but in total I bought quite a lot. I'll put an image on screen for reference. Now in buying them I could have stopped for sure. By this point my fiancée was much more knowledgeable on Pokemon, and has her own favourite one now, Tinkaton by the way. But when buying them I felt like I had to buy more. Once I had Eevee and Flareon, I felt like I had to buy more of the evolutions. So I got the Jolteon of course. And you know, it's the 3 original evolutions, so Vaporeon had to be bought as well. It's actually quite surprising I stopped myself there because my favourite is actually Umbreon. Yeah, I didn't buy it because I felt like I would have had to get Espeon as well, because it would have been weird to get one but not the other. Of course, this is an extremely rare case just for myself that started as a light-hearted adventure to convert my partner into a Pokemon player, but when you start to break down the numbers for how much this can cost, it can get pretty expensive. And it's not just a trading card game that is a collectible, you can get Build-A-Bears, and you can also get the pop figures. I'm pretty sure Apom has a pop figure now. Apom! Sorry if I offended any Apom fans out there. I actually think Apom and its evolution are pretty cool, but that just shows you the power of Pokemon's merchandise. More often than not, the generic merchandising will use well-known Pokemon because they're so easy to recognize. So your Pikachus, Eevees, Charmanders, Squirtles, Bulbasaurs, and the evolution of the original 3 starters. These are all very common because they're very generic, so will naturally appear on the generic items. Then you can get a bit more specific when it comes to plush toys or collectible ones. It's essentially a full money-making extravaganza with no sign of stopping. Why would you buy a £2 ruler when you can get a £3 one that has a Pikachu and an Eevee on it? Every single part of the Pokemon merchandise line is very well crafted. Bear in mind, Hello Kitty has been around for many years, and Pokemon's still dwarfing them in terms of branded sales. It's not necessarily the big items that make up the expensive nature of the Pokemon merchandise line, but the little items could easily add up a cost. For example, I currently have a little Eevee on my desk at work that cost a couple of pounds. I just bought it because it's cute, no other reason, it's just cute. And that's what the merchandise line does. Little small costs here and there, but why wouldn't you want to pay a little bit more and get an Eevee branded toaster? It's a no-brainer. Now, that's the games, TCG, and the merchandise line, but what else is there? I'm going to fire some more costs at you from other areas of Pokemon, just to show you it can be quite costly no matter the area you're interested in. Also, this is provided everyone's following the rules at home. Well, the anime in the UK is available on BBC iPlayer, provided you pay a TV license, of course, or Netflix in other countries. So there's an additional cost to chalk down. There's been occasions in the past where the old series is broadcast on Twitch, which is always fun, but it's not the standard method of consuming, hence additional cost. If you want to buy it on DVD or Blu-ray, that's another expense. Apparently the Indigo League is £30 on Blu-ray in itself, bearing in mind that anime has a mountain of seasons. If I remember correctly, it was usually 3 a region. Johto had Johto Journeys, Johto League Champions and Master Quest. Hoenn had Advanced Challenge and Advanced Battle. Yeah, I think that's right. Well, at least early on it worked like that. So again, a massive cost if you want to buy them on Blu-ray. Blu-ray. Granted, the idea of physical media has nosedived for the most part for years and years with the rise of the digital Armageddon, so the market for this could be a bit small, but again, high costs all around if you want to buy every season of the anime. If you follow the manga, especially the Adventures one, the price can vary, but I'd estimate it's around £3.50 per volume. Not expensive, but again an additional cost. If you wanted to ride the Pokemon branded trains or planes, that could also be more expensive than a standard train or planes. Pokemon Go Festival, Pokemon Radio, what about Pokemon Go? Okay, I'm going a little bit overboard here. What I'm trying to highlight is that Pokemon is now so completely ingrained in everyday life, in so many different fields, be it video gaming, merchandising and the trading card game, it can become an expensive hobby. Now you aren't necessarily going to be spending money to a ridiculous degree like I've been saying in this video. At the end of the day, if you want to buy everything on Blu-ray for the anime, then go for it. Pokemon has effectively managed its brand and expanded itself to pretty much every corner of the earth, making it the successful juggernaut it is now, and you certainly can't stop it. For myself personally, the major issues when it comes down to cost with Pokemon is that the main ways to consume the franchise that I would personally class as core elements have become incredibly expensive. To collect Pokemon cards, it's a lot of money to burn through, and if you can't get them individually, you'll have to get lucky in some card packs. The old games are now so expensive that some of them are triple figures in some cases, or even the price of consoles. And because the demand is so high but the supply is so low, there doesn't look like there's going to be a point where it will end. In the case of the old games, the alternate option is to make them accessible online via the Switch. But unfortunately, Pokemon's such a commodity nowadays that it will probably come with an additional cost. Yes, some old games are now on the Switch and that's great, but no main series games yet. No Gen 1, 2 or 3 despite having virtual consoles available right now. When it comes to the cards on the other hand, especially the old ones, I don't really think there's a way to sort it. When it comes to new packs, I do think it'll die down at some point. Naturally, things will reach a peak and then eventually begin to drop, but the old cards, well, they may be lost to time. When it comes to everything else like the merchandise, a lot of it comes down to careful consumer spending. You don't need to buy all the Build-A-Bear evolutions because you've bought all the other ones in the past, or if it doesn't make sense to not get an Espeon because you've already got the Umbreon. You know, you don't need to buy all the t-shirts either. The issue for me is that the major ways to get into Pokemon are usually the most expensive. Nobody can really be shocked when people use alternative methods to play Pokemon because there's no other financial option to do so. Similarly, I also think this helps the interest in the pack openings on YouTube or streams, because it can be a big expense to do so. But when you really want to see that Charizard card packed, you've got to find a way. Another major difficulty is that profits keep rising, so why would they reinvent the wheel if the wheel isn't broken? I think adding the old Pokemon games to the Switch, or a proper actualized way to play the TCG card game. Yes, TCG Live does exist, but I don't think it compares well to Master Duel, and these are two key parts of the franchise, and probably the major ways that we engage in it, and I just don't think it should cost as much as it does anymore. All this just because I buy things every now and then in my everyday life. Thanks for watching, guys. Now, as I've mentioned earlier, I'm in the process of moving, so things are going to be a bit hectic for the next month or so, but hopefully very soon I'm going to have a good setup for production of these videos, and also to stream games. I'm certainly leaning towards streaming games on YouTube, but I might head over to Twitch too. I haven't decided yet. If there's any games you would like to see me play, let me know. Of course, I'm going to play Pokemon, but I might play some other games that I'm quite interested in as well. I'm thinking maybe a bit of Mario Kart with subscribers, and I will definitely play the new Dragon Ball game later in the year. Make sure to like and subscribe as it really helps out my channel, and follow me on Twitter for some more Pokemon opinions or discussions. I refuse to use the other name for it. See you next time, guys.